is this?
One can never watch enough television.
There has been a tremendous concentration of the mass media over the last 50 years, from over 100 companies to 6 companies. Back in the 1934 Communications Act, each media company was only allowed to own a handful of stations, and they weren't allowed to have cross-ownership. They couldn't own all the media in your town. Now they can own more and more because congressmen who've gotten elected as a result of the mass media have given them more and more. That means very few people have the right to speak to us over television, over radio, through the New York Times, the LA Times, the different news media. The whole purpose of the First Amendment is to guarantee that we have more, not less speech. However, when you start to get down and say only a few people can put up their soapbox, only a few people can address the audience, suddenly you've limited the amount of speech. Now that's the government control of speech. On the other hand, when those few people recognize that the government is the one that's licensed them to speak, they start to act in a way that's not going to jeopardize that relationship.
Could this be one of the reasons any critical reporting of universally important issues, such as the Federal Reserve, have been cut out of the public debate for so long? As Ted Turner relates in his article, My Beef with Big Media? Why would major media corporations that control the information flow to 95% of the American citizens, fail to report on the detrimental activities of the Federal Reserve System, a government-sanctioned, quasi-private banking cartel that literally controls 100% of the money flow to the same citizens, as well as the lion's share of the money flow to Congress itself?
The amount of money it costs today to run for Congress or even to run for president is obscene. And most of that money goes into television commercials and spots and all of the mass media advertising that needs to be done to reach the 295 million Americans, a vast number of people. And when that person wins, if the media has supported him, naturally he wants to pay them back. He may not think of that consciously, but in appropriating licenses and expanding territories and allowing them to own more than one media outlet, that's exactly what happens. As a result, the number of media companies, as we said before, has concentrated in a few hands. And unfortunately, Congress and the media work together to present an image to the American people that does not always include every aspect of the truth. This reciprocity, this in cahoots process, has obscured many of the more important issues to the American people. And there's no more important issue than the issue of fiat money.
When you give men the power to create money out of nothing, you shouldn't be surprised if they turn around and create money out of nothing, because that's what they're supposed to do. Now, the underlying philosophy is that, well, we'll be very conservative about it. We won't run rampant. We won't abuse this power, would we? So we give them blindly this power to create money out of nothing because we trust them to use this power wisely. Nowhere in history has this ever been a justified trust. Every time man has had that power, and this started back in antiquity, those with the power have abused it, and they have created more and more and more money at a rate much faster than the expansion of goods and services which are being produced by the productive side of the economy. Now, if the goods and services were growing at a rate which is exactly the same as the money supply, then the purchasing power of the monetary unit would remain constant. In ancient Rome, if you had a 1-ounce gold coin, that would be the cost of a nice toga, a handcrafted belt, and a pair of sandals. Today, thousands of years later, if you have a 1-ounce gold coin and you convert that into Federal Reserve notes, you can walk into a store and buy a nice suit, a handcrafted belt, and a pair of shoes. The real price of those items, and all items for that matter, throughout history, does not change when measured in terms of something of intrinsic value, such as gold or silver, because those things take human effort to produce as well as the belt, the toga, and the sandals. Both of them take human effort to produce, and that's why they maintain value with each other. But once you break that away, and you give men the power to expand the money supply without that discipline, they're going to expand the money supply faster than the increase in goods and services, and then you're going to have this difference in purchasing power. We call it inflation.
Well, it's always politically popular to impose financial burdens on somebody else. It tends to be politically difficult to impose financial burdens on someone who's living alongside of you, because they tend to have votes and they tend to have representatives who will take their position. It's fairly easy to impose a financial burden on the future, because the future generation tends not to have any votes or representation at all in the present. As soon as you start talking about monetization of debt, where the banks come in and now buy governmental debt with new money that the banks have created through this special privilege they have of creating money in the Federal Reserve System, the redistribution of wealth that takes place through that process, most people don't understand. It happens through depreciation of currency, and the depreciation of currency usually leads to increases in prices, which the average person calls inflation. Inflation is really the increase in the money supply. The prices increase as a consequence of that. But the average person doesn't understand how this happens. And he's going to blame gold speculators in Switzerland. He's going to blame greedy unions. He's going to blame price gouging. He's going to blame everybody but Congress and the banking system. So it's easy politically, through monetization of debt, to expand borrowing beyond prudent levels. Now why is that tyrannous? Well, at a certain level, it's tyrannous. The definition of tyranny is the exercise of a power that no one should be allowed to exercise. Okay? And it's tyrannous because no one should be allowed to exercise a power that puts burdens on people that are not allowed an opportunity to be heard, an opportunity to vote, an opportunity to have some kind of a say. Right? Granted, to some extent, you're going to have to do that in the nature of government as long as you have borrowing, but beyond a certain point, it becomes tyrannous. And it's beyond that point that the present system allows our political structure to move too easily. How much, take for instance, how much is the purchasing power of Federal Reserve notes lost since World War II? About 90%. You think that hasn't had some consequence in terms of redistribution of wealth, in terms of the way the economy has developed? Of course it has. The average person doesn't see it. He can't follow the lines of cause and effect. But it's there, and his life is quite a bit different from what it would have been if that hadn't occurred.
Purchasing power, monetization of debt, inflation. What do we mean by all these terms? Terms we may have heard many times, but still fail to connect the dots. Are you confused? If so, you're not alone.
Inflation, I think, is a bad word because really we think of inflation as rising prices. But in reality, what's happening, prices are not going up. It's that the value of the dollar or the monetary unit is going down. That's what's really happening if we understand the process. And it's a tax, therefore. Our lost purchasing power, what we have to pay more for a bag of groceries today than we did 5 years ago, comes out of our pocket, comes out of our earning capacity. That is value which we should have. But it's been taken from us through a process that we call inflation, but in reality it's a hidden tax. Inflation is the result of being able to create money out of nothing, and that is the power we have given to the Federal Reserve System. Therefore, we can say that the Federal Reserve System is the agency of a hidden tax called inflation.
Since the early 1900s, almost no one talks about the country's banking system anymore.
What happened? There was a shooting, then there was nothing.
Yet our money, like water, is one of the most important commodities we have. More than that, the quality of our money affects the productivity of every man, woman, and company in America. As time goes